I've been thinking a lot about my friend down the street here who passed away a couple of weeks ago, Martin Moscow, Roshi of the Zen center, Hakubai. Roshi Hakubai was his Zen name. This is someone who was born in Denver and raised Jewish and had a bar mitzvah, and from a very early age got really connected to meditation and spiritual practices from the East, and became a very highly ordained Japanese Zen Buddhist monk. Spent a lot of time in Japan. And when I knew that he was dying, I had gone to visit him while he was pretty sick, and I said, "Can I give you a prayer for healing in Hebrew?" And he said, "I would love that." And then when we came to the part where I asked if he remembered his Hebrew name without missing a beat, he said, "Moshe Yitzchak." And I find it very incredible that this man, who was such a deep teacher of spiritual practice, and both Reb Chana and I had the experience of taking 7th graders to his place, because part of our B'nai Mitzvah program, we wanted them to understand different spiritual traditions, and he was incredible with these kids. Over there on the property, some of you may have seen it, there is a magnificent Zen garden that he created, because among other things he was he built contemplative gardens all over the world. He's written about 10 books on contemplative gardening, and he would develop gardens like all over the world. That was really his business and his main source of income. So this Zen garden over there is so magnificent, and he would, when the times that I went there, he would just say so little, but he would just start walking in a kind of Zen walking meditation practice, and invite the kids, the 7th graders, after, on a Wednesday afternoon, after like a full day of school. 7th graders are not always that easy, let's be honest. And they just like dropped into this sanctity and this reverence and this silence as they followed him around the garden. And it was very beautiful to behold this. And then we would go into his kind of yurt, which is like a classroom teaching space, and he'd just talk about some of the basics of Zen Buddhism. He wasn't trying to convert anybody or make us bow down to idols or anything like that, right? And it was just very powerful. And I'd shared this with some of you when, in I guess in the Zen tradition, similar to Shmira, that for 4-day period the body is not left unattended, and there are people chanting and sitting and being in the presence of the body. And even though generally I don't do that stuff because I'm a Kohen, but I just decided I wanted to go there, and I went there thinking I'd just pop in for like a minute, and I was there for 2 hours. I couldn't leave. There was something about the energy of the space that was so powerful. And then there were these 2 monks there when I got there, one of whom was a Japanese Zen monk called Dai, a very funny guy, and I thought it was just going to be reverence. And I had a book of Psalms with me, and after a while he just said, hello, and what's the book? And I said, well, it's a book. I thought if it was appropriate, I would really like to chant something in Hebrew. And so he said, let me ask Martin. He says yes. and so I chanted Psalm 121, I lift up my eyes to the mountains, from where will my hope come? And then afterwards, he looked at me and he said, I was watching Martin's face the whole time. He relaxed when you were chanting Hebrew. Anyway, the point of me telling this story is not, there was something very powerful about being in his presence after he had died, and to have known him a bit and to learn from him a bit in his life. But the context in which I'm thinking about it right now is just this fascination, and it's going to relate to our parsha a little bit, about how many, when you look at how many of the really important Buddhist leaders in this country, and this is many of you know this, I mean, they're all Jews. Yeah. Sylvia Bornstein, Jack Kornfeld, there's quite a lot. right, Jan Salzman, right. A lot of, and it's always been fascinating to me. And I'm not, there were comments last week that implied that we just have to make them realize that Judaism's the right part. And I don't have that sense that, of sadness that they're not Jews. They found their spiritual truth, but I do have fascination about why they didn't find what they were looking for in Judaism. And this is where Reb Zalman and the Jewish renewal movement has been such an important part of this, because what happened, I promise you I'm going to relate this to the Parsha in a moment. What happened, if you look at 1950s Judaism, and some of you here in this country, some of you here know this much more than I do, not because I'm young, but because I didn't live here in the 1950s. But let's face it, post-war Jewish life was traumatized. Yeah. Talk about trauma. We were living in trauma. And so the Jewish institutions became all about big conservative and reform synagogues, about the building, about creating these big spaces that was partially modeled on the church. The clergy were the professionals, and the Jews in the pews just sat there and received it. They didn't offer anything. They didn't give anything. They didn't participate. I'm characterizing it a little bit, and some of you maybe grew up in those communities, and I'm sorry if it sounds offensive and insulting, but the reality was, post-war, Jewish life was about you support the institution, you support Israel. And there was no sense of any kind of cultivation of an inner life. And there's been lots of documented research about this. Some of you may have read the book about a decade ago called The Jew Within, that was by the sociologist Steve Friedman and Arnie Eisen, who was the recent chancellor of JTS in New York. And they wrote this book all about how the Jew within is about what the Jew within, the Jew who was a spiritual seeker, the Jew who really wanted to have an inner life, the Jew who wanted to cultivate a sense of spirituality, didn't find it in Judaism back then. Yeah. Right? So they were looking elsewhere. And so when, Maharishi was coming to this country and they were learning TM, or when, Suzuki Roshi, caught many people with the Zen Buddhist movement. He was one of the first in the States to get people there. Leonard Cohen, of course, sat with Suzuki Roshi for a long time. But all of these different movements, and it's so interesting to me because the list goes on and on of Jewish people who were, in some cases, they maintained extremely strong identity as Jewish. Cultural identities as Jewish, ancestral identities as Jewish, gastronomical identities as Jewish. But their spiritual life was not Jewish because they didn't find spiritual connection and meaning within the Jewish community as it was then. Right? So, yeah. So I think I think that my point is, when we read this amazing Parsha about Truma, there is something about the external and there's something about the internal, right? Because if you look at the whole idea that everybody participates and everybody brings something, everybody participates and everybody brings something, and yet the gifts are only wanted to be received by the people who are giving willingly and generously from their hearts. So it's this kind of paradox. It's let them all bring gifts. And these are the gifts that they're going to bring. And there's this sense of obligation. Everybody has to bring something. Some will bring gold, and some will bring silver, and some will bring copper, and some will bring, dolphin skins. Dolphin skins? Yes, dolphin skins. But only those who have a sense of nidivat lev, of a generosity of heart, are the people who are going to bring these gifts somehow. So it's this paradox. It's is it an obligation or is it a voluntary gift? And of course the answer is yes. It's both. It's both an obligation and a voluntary gift, because there's meant to be a sense that everybody participates, but everybody finds a way of cultivating within their own hearts a sense of generosity of spirit. So when, later on you have the Hasidei Ashkenaz, who were the 15th century German Ashkenazim, who were Hasidim, before the Eastern European Hasidim started with the Baal Shem Tov in the 1700s, there was a famous Eliezer HaChasid who has this famous phrase, Bilvavi Mishkan Evnei. let me build a mishkan, let me build a temple, a tabernacle, a sanctuary in my heart. It's made a beautiful song, right? Vahavi mishkan evnei. Like, let me build the mishkan inside my heart. This idea that is really not that radical. It's taken from the notion that really after the temple was destroyed, our prayers were a replacement of the sacrifices. So they were avodah shebalev. They were worship of the heart. But here's the thing that I really want to get to, is that it seems to me that Jewish life, whether we are building a building, and God willing we are building a building, and God willing everyone will participate and everyone will do so with such generosity of heart and a sense of willingness and a sense of acknowledgement that actually when we really give from our heart, what we receive is way, way, way bigger than what we actually give, because that's the nature of humanity. Like, I think many of us have experienced it. If we're not feeling great, if we're having like a period of depression, if we just lift ourselves up and do something for somebody else or give to an organization that we support, doesn't it transform the way we feel? It can, because giving does that. But it's not just about giving in a material and a physical way. It's also about how we cultivate our hearts, right? So if the Mishkan is something that we build inside our hearts, it's like it's both developing an internal relationship with spirit, whatever that might look like for each of us. So the idea that these people, the Martin Moscows and the Sylvia Bornsteins and the Jack Cornfields and the Susan Saltzmans, who couldn't find that within Jewish life, that we, thank God, are heirs to a different kind of Judaism. We had the gift of Reb Zalman living in Bold, and we know that we can have the beautiful external practices of what Judaism is and what Judaism offers, because that's too a Mishkan. Shabbos is a Mishkan. Our liturgy is a Mishkan. Reading the Torah every week is it's all a Mishkan. But it can be just about the externals, and it's how we have the internals as well. There is this very, very, very important kind of dichotomy in Jewish life, in the rabbinic thought, that I really like talking about, because it's what I would call a dynamic tension. And many of you know this, but I'm going to repeat it because it's worth repeating. But the whole idea of keva and kavanah, right? Keva, when we put a mezuzah on a door, we say, which means that I'm fixing the mezuzah to the... I don't want to sort of like say, oh, mezuzah, like float and find your place. No, I need to bang it in with nails, right? It's fixed onto my doorpost, right? And that's the same root as keva. Keva is what is fixed. The time to pray, the words that we pray, the Torah portion that we read each week, the structure of our mitzvot, the all of the mitzvot that we inherit from the Torah, all of the cycle and the calendar of Jewish holidays, all of that is keva. It's fixed in time, and it's fixed in space. But the kavanah is what we bring to it, the intention that we bring to it, the direction that we put into it, what our feeling is behind the words, what our own personal prayers might be that are joined with these ancient prayers that have been said for thousands of years. And it's like, let's face it, sometimes there's too much keva and not enough kavanah. Here, I mean, with me, I don't deny it. Sometimes I'm getting caught up on the keva and there's not enough kavanah. And sometimes there's too much kavanah and not enough keva. And finding that balance is really tricky. I have the honor of being part of, since it began, the Ramah of the Rockies camp, a couple of hours from here. And one of the things that I have been deeply involved in is how we teach and lead tefillah, how we teach and lead prayer at Camp Ramah. And it's like, sometimes we go too far into, we say, just go and find a tree and like open your heart to the tree. And sometimes we're like, la, 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 la. And what I've realized recently is, and I have to say, Esther is doing like amazing work with some of our kids, because when I was down there 2 weeks ago for the Kolenu, which is our tefillah that we have for our young people, each time I go, each month they know more and more and more, and they're learning the keva, they're learning how to say these brachot, and I think that's really important. I don't want to minimize it, how important it is, and we've seen Noam like wanting to, when Noam and Jason sometimes are leading the Birkot HaShachar, the morning blessings that we don't always say here on a Shabbat morning, because he's learned them and he loves them and he's connected to them. And so it's like we can learn those, but we also can learn what they mean. like what the Talmud says about them. These morning blessings, like how do we wake up in the morning? We wake up with a sense of gratitude. We acknowledge the fact that my soul is back in my body. We acknowledge that I have a body that can stretch itself, that I can open my eyes and see the world around me. And all of the ways in which those morning blessings reflect that. If they become completely rote, we lose the connection between body and soul. But if we're just sort of like, oh, thank you, I'm awake and I'm alive, and we don't connect it to some of the liturgy, then we maybe lose the connection to the Keva. The Mishkan is the same. The Mishkan that we read about, like what are those gifts that we bring? Yes, in order to really create the building, we have to, everyone participates. If we are serious about building a building, which I really think we are across the street, everybody's going to have to participate. And the more that we participate, the more it will feel like our space. Because ultimately it's not about the space, it's what happens in the space. Which is why that verse that we say again and again, and we sing again in Avasuli Mikdash V'Shechanti B'Tocham, like let them bring the gifts, and not I will dwell in this building, I'm going to dwell in their hearts, because that's where we actually build the Mishkan. We create a building for the amazing community that we are to flourish and to be sustained. But really, it's not about the building. It's not about the materials. Yes, it's all about the materials. And there's so many people working so hard to think through like what the design is going to look like and what the materials look like. But ultimately, we create a space, and it's what happens inside that space, and it's what happens inside our hearts that is really transformational, right? As Rabbi Jonathan, of course, I have to quote Rabbi Jonathan Sachs a little bit, but there's this powerful at the end of one of his essays on this parsha. He says, God doesn't live in a house of stone. God lives in the hearts of those who give. God doesn't live in a building of stone. God lives in the hearts of those who give. And so when we move into that new building, those of us who've given to that building are going to feel the depth of connection that we have to that space in such an intimate and special way. And everybody, hopefully even the people who don't give, will feel that, because we're going to create that kind of space. But the point is, it can't just be about the building. Because if it's just about the building, then it's really the golden calf that we're going to read about in 2 weeks' time, where it's just about an object that we get all caught up in. I was in a meeting a couple of days ago with Rabbi, she's not a rabbi, she's a Reverend Lydia Ferranti Roseberry, who is the Universalist Unitarian minister of the EU Church of Boulder Valley, that Cass and I and others actually went to have a tour because they got this amazing new building. And she was saying that there's this sense in which the building, beautiful as it is starting to become a little bit of an idol, because everyone's like, we have to protect our investment, we have to, and it's like, and then it's like this sense of like, well, what is the ultimate purpose and space for? And it's to create a space of Kehila Kadosha, of sacred community, where we can each have our own rich inner life, our own rich spiritual life, where we'll cultivate generations of Jews who won't feel that they need to look elsewhere. Not that there's bad things in those other places, but that they will really feel so connected, both externally and internally, with the keva, the fixed nature of what our tradition is, the amazing liturgy that we have, the amazing cycle of traditions that we have, the amazing holidays and the Torah and all of it that we have. They'll feel a connection to it both externally, and they will also be able to cultivate inner lives where they will feel joyfully connected to our people and to our traditions. And that's really what the Mishkan is all about. It's about both. It's not either or, it's about both. And so the quality of giving, I think, when I finished, I was reading earlier that there's a psychologist whose name I can't remember right now, who has created this term, the IKEA theory. And the IKEA theory is that you are much more likely to feel good about a piece of furniture that you have assembled yourself. I never could do those IKEA, because there was always like, oh, I forgot to put this bolt in here, and now the whole thing's not stable and all of that. But the whole concept of IKEA is to create self-assembly furniture. So it's this idea you buy. Yes, it's probably a little cheaper than the other thing, but you buy it and then you put it together, and then you put it together and you think, yeah, I did that. and then it collapses. No, but, yeah, I do. But it's like it's such a fascinating, concept, and I think that I'm in Colorado we have a whole bunch of Jewish men who defy the stereotypes of Jewish men, because most Jewish men, me included, like the power tools come out once a year when I build my sukkah. That's it, right? I'm not. Actually, there's a lot of you here who are not that at all. But like this classic, stereotype of Jewish men is like, we call someone else to do that stuff. Right? But not so with the Israelites and the Mishkan. I'm not saying that the Mishkan was created by IKEA, God forbid, but there is something about the way in which everybody helped in the assembly of that project that made them all feel like deeply connected and deeply a part of it. So this isn't a direct appeal for although that will come, of course, but it is a sense that everybody has their truma. And as Michael said in our final musical Shabbat with him when he gave his wonderful Devar Torah last night, he was saying that the real sense of truma, the word is often translated as a gift or an offering, but really inside truma is ram, reish mem, larum is to elevate. So really it's not about giving, it's about elevating. It's about all of the materials that come into this, all of the beautiful and elaborate fabrics and materials that are described in the construction of this building. Ultimately, it's about taking materiality and elevating it into spirituality. That's ultimately what it is. It's the opposite in Purim. Did you know Purim's coming, by the way? Did you know that? Yeah. Because it's the opposite in Purim. When we read the first chapter of the Megillah, you have all of the same materials that are listed in the construction of the Mishkan, but they're used for a debauched 180-day-long party of King Ahasuerus. And the Midrash says that he actually plundered all of the stuff from the temple, from the temple once it was destroyed, took all of the stuff and was using it for like this pure materiality. So that's what it's really all about, Truma. It's about taking materiality and transforming it into spirituality, where every single one of us participates, and where the Holy Presence, called Shekhinah, call it God, doesn't reside within the stone, but resides in the hearts of each one of us. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.